Greetings from the Blessed Michael McGivney Pilgrimage Center in New Haven, Connecticut. And thank you for your interest in today's presentation about San Pedro Maldonado, a parish priest from Chihuahua, Mexico. For those of you who have tuned in before to web presentations here from the McGivney Center, you know that we're accustomed to giving you content about Father McGivney. Well, today's presentation is not really a departure because there are many aspects of Father Maldonado's life and ministry that are comparable to those of Father Michael McGivney, the Connecticut priest who founded the Knights of Columbus. And you'll learn about those common traits and the important outreach of both of these parish priests, and both of them also Knights of Columbus chaplains to the faithful entrusted to their spiritual care. We're going to do the presentation first in English, and then it'll be represented entirely in Spanish. So each portion should last on the order of an hour. Throughout the session, you may submit questions. There is a utility on the right side of your screen. Questions will be addressed following the main presentation. Today is May 18th, 2022, the anniversary of the birth of St. John Paul II. And this session is being recorded and will be available in both languages on the Blessed Michael McGivney Center's YouTube page. Joining me today as our presenter is Father Mark Salas. He is a priest of the Diocese of El Paso, Texas, and he is the assistant chaplain for the Texas State Council of the Knights of Columbus. And I'm also grateful to be joined by my colleague, Luis Guevara, who is Executive Director for Hispanic Growth for the Knights of Columbus. He is a Mexico native with great knowledge and insights about the history of the Knights of Columbus in his homeland. Father Mark, we're very excited about your presentation. We know of your dedication as a parish priest, Our Lady of the Assumption in El Paso, and also for the dedication you give to the Knights of Columbus as Grand Knight of your own council, and also as the Assistant State Chaplain in the state of Texas. You know a great deal about St. Pedro, and you'll share with us why it's very significant that you are in El Paso as you tell your story. And you've identified 5 loves as you have distributed or displayed on your screen. We're all looking forward and ready to learn. So, Father Mark, the program is yours.
Thank you, Peter. Bienvenido, Luis. And so many of my brother knights throughout the great order and throughout the various jurisdictions. I know we're getting to the end of the year. Still, many jurisdictions need Circle of Honor. So let's go out there and recruit. And one of the best ways to recruit is to talk to our council. So chaplain, to be able to guide us throughout these steps. But what is the spirituality of a council chaplain? And ultimately, it's the spirituality of a parish priest, because our councils are an order of knights called to the various council members. And so, dear brothers, let's continue and start. Father McGivney and Father Maldonado were 2 diocesan priests, and they lived their daily life marked and formed by their local needs at the diocese and their own parishes. These one led one to found the Knights of Columbus, a fraternity to take care of one another. The other, it led him to give a witness to Christ in the ultimate price, which is to shed his own blood for the love of his own, for his beloved in Chihuahua, and for Christ, the true heart and the true shepherd. He was born in Chihuahua, Mexico, as you heard Peter share. And so we'll just go into the various needs that he has presented for us. So he's ordained in 1917, and at this time, 18, at this time, there are various persecutions of the faith in Mexico. And so this persecution and the subsequent civil war that ensued because of that was between the government, which was communist and Masonic, and the Catholic Church and those within the faith. And if you notice, it became a crime even to celebrate Mass. This image that you see right now is of Father Vera, who was executed for the crime of celebrating Mass publicly. And he was dragged out in his vestments, not even after he finished in the sacristy, and he was executed. And so this is what ensued. And yet, even though we had this persecution, it called the people to have a choice between the faith of Guadalupe, the Son of Christ, and his church, or not. Pictured here is one family that were all brought in to this war to choose between the faith. And so they put over the eagle on the flag, as you can see, Our Lady of Guadalupe. And amongst those was a 14-year-old young boy, Jose Sanchez. Luis knows the story, and I think you've been there, Luis, where this young man was martyred, and he had to walk to his grave. I don't know if he had to dig his grave, and there he was executed. And this 14-year-old, I know he was 4 years short of being a Knight of Columbus, but he's a great example for all of us. And what the Scourge of War called even our youth to give witness to Christ. And so just beautiful story after story of this life and legacy. But the order itself was begun even during this time. Father Maldonado's particular council, he's actually a charter member of 2419 Fray Alfonso Council in Chihuahua, which will be soon celebrating 100 years in December. He, along with 7 or 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, excuse me, 11 other brother priests were charter members of this council in 1922. And just how beautiful that in the midst of persecution, and even though in the north of Mexico, the persecution was not intense as in the south, the Knights of Columbus were there. And speaking yesterday with Luis and Peter and others, the Knights of Columbus were someone looked at, even by the bishops, to be able to support and grow. And Father Maldonado then has in this background to make a choice. Does he become a priest or does he stay home? Because it's one thing to be a Catholic, you're marked. It's another thing to be a priest, you're marked. And he made a choice. So they closed the seminaries. His seminary was interrupted actually because of the persecutions, and they were sent here to El Paso, Texas. We're right on the border of northern Mexico, and south of us is Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua, and south of that is Chihuahua, Chihuahua. And so 2 seminaries were begun here by the Franciscans, and Father Maldonado had to make a choice whether to interrupt his studies and leave Chihuahua and possibly not come back. So he decided to stay the first time, and he studied music. He became a violinist, and he was playing music and teaching. One of his confreres did get ordained, finished his studies, came back and said, "What are you doing? You need to be a priest." And he's like, "But I can't leave." So by then the persecution had waned. There was 2 waves of the persecution, at least in Chihuahua. And so this first wave kind of died down. And so he was able to continue his studies at home. By the time he's going to be ordained in 1918, his archbishop is very sick, and since Bishop Schuler of El Paso was a benevolent bishop to the Mexican Church, allowing the religious orders, we still have 2 foundations of the Sisters of Perpetual Adoration of the Blessed Sacrament here in El Paso, Texas, founded under Bishop Schuler, who fled the persecution, and their vocations still come from Mexico. And it's not like they were a stepping stone, like they come to this monastery to worship the Lord in the flesh 24/7 as a community. And so because Bishop Schuler was a benevolent bishop and he had family here in El Paso, because we're so close to the border, Father Maldonado, or Deacon Maldonado, received ordination. So Father Maldonado said Mass here. His first solemn Mass of all days, and it's an important date, is February 11th, 1918, back in Chihuahua at his home parish. There was the solemn or Canta Misa, or the solemn Mass. But he said Mass first here in El Paso. And he returned back, and he was a parish priest in the area. He was very active. Oh, and this is a copy of the charter right here. I didn't want to interrupt the other picture so you could see his council. This is him right here, actually, by the door, along with, my goodness, 10 other brother priests. Imagine having 11 brother priests as charter members of a council. We need to go back to that. And And so he grows his ministry. He is exiled twice. In one of them, 1925, he's taken out and he's going to be publicly executed. Because again, executions aren't done in silence. They're done publicly to keep the people in order. So the second time he's going to be martyred, he's dragged out. And by then, Pope Pius XI had said in Articulum Mortem, your last words on the moment of death, right? Like before they execute you, any last words. If they yelled out, Viva Cristo Rey, they received a plenary indulgence. And since they shed their blood in martyrdom, they would receive absolution for all their sins. That's two ways to get your sins forgiven. One, to die a martyr, the other one just to go to confession on Saturday or throughout the week. And so, brothers, Father Maldonado goes out there and they drag him out. They call everybody to see what coward the priest of the church are. And he makes the sign of the cross and says, Viva Cristo Rey. And the soldiers were so moved, and the ones in charge knew they could not make this guy a bloody martyr, because if he was a blood-filled martyr or a wet martyr, they were going to lose everything, because that was going to embolden the youth, the elderly, and the people loved him. He went out to the fields, he went out, he knew everybody. If he knew who was poor or widowed or orphan because of the persecutions, he knew how to manage resources quietly so as to not shame the poor and to not expose the wealthy. And so he was able to do all this work. And so he was very, very loved. And he was a very tender and affectionate man as a pastor. There's still people who knew him in their CCD classes, who knew him as a confessor, who knew him as a family member. And they speak about his great compassion, intelligence, and just sincere love for all people. And that virtue of tenderness that he had, and of deep affection, especially for little ones and for the poor. So, so they can't kill him. So what they do is they exile him back to El Paso, and they give him money and say, just leave and make your life. But again, his heart is in Chihuahua. His heart is in his diocese where he's incarnated. Incarnated means what community or what territory you belong to. And so he goes back. This other time he's exiled, they tell him just leave or we'll shoot you. So he leaves for about 2 to 3 weeks, but he's just in the desert. He didn't even leave the area. So he's out in the desert in the shade and drinking from the river, trapping, all different ways. And then he comes back. But that first one where he said, Viva Cristo Rey, he really felt the true freedom to be a pastor. And that's what brought him back to El Paso. I mean, to Chihuahua, to be at Santa Isabela, to be at his parish. But there's a second wave of persecution, and the Archbishop of Chihuahua did not allow any Cristeros to participate at all in his archdiocese under pain of excommunication, because he said violence is not the answer, but witnessing is. And so there's no overt persecution, but it's covert. And at one point, the schools were changing their curriculum to communism, to socialism, to messianic and atheistic principles under the guise of the scientific method, under the guise of open dialogue and freedom, under the guise of social progress and liberty. And Father Maldonado openly preached against sending their children to these schools. And his parishioners listened to him, because he said to grow without Christ is to grow without love. To grow without love means you cannot be fully human. And so that closed the schools down because the parents were not sending their kids to the local school. And a fire broke out at that school. So what happened was they blamed him for the fire. And so there was an arrest warrant out for him. This is 1937. And so he goes into hiding for a couple of weeks after the fire, well, after they issue the warrant. Excuse me, I have a cough, a dry cough. It's real dusty today in El Paso. So they issue an arrest warrant, and they're hunting for him like a dog, his families would say, day and night through rivers, through closets, through false roofs and ceilings and basement floors. And it was on February 10th, 1937, which was Ash Wednesday, if you look up at the liturgical calendar, where he was betrayed. His friend had not offered his location, and so they were able to go to the ranchito, the ranch, um, and capture him. And he didn't fight. He was taking viaticum because it's Ash Wednesday, so he's taking viaticum to people and doing the anointings and hearing confessions. He always did that. And he had a relic, a pyx with him containing the Blessed Sacrament to host. And so they find him and they start beating him because he's not resisting, and they make him take his shoes off. And as they're taking him back to Santa Isabela, to the municipal palace, their city government, the local presidio or soldier station, everything's together there. And the uh, Sicasio, he has power over everything. And so they're taking him back there, walking barefoot, and they've beaten him. And in one of the beatings, they used the butt end of a rifle and they hit his left side, crushing this part of his skull and loosening his eye because it tears the skin as well, and his eye falls out. So he's holding that. His jaw is crushed, and so in that moment of pain, the Blessed Sacrament gets loose. The pyx falls from him and opens, and the two hosts fall on the floor. One of his executioners grabs that host, the two hosts, and jams it into his bleeding, broken jaw and says, "Swallow this dog." And For us, the Last Communion is one of the most greatest gifts that a Roman Catholic can receive. We call that viaticum because it via tecum, go with you, for bread for the journey, and the bread of life that brings us into eternal life is Christ. So more important than the final absolution, more important than the last anointing, more important than anything is to be able to take viaticum. And under liturgical law, anyone can administer viaticum just like anyone can administer baptism in necessity. And to say that the one who martyred you and opened to you the gates of heaven is the one that fed you your last Eucharist. And then the words he used, trágate esto perro, swallow this, you dog, reminds us of the Samaritan woman who had the sick child, right? And Christ is saying we cannot throw the food of the children to the dogs. And she says in her great, great, deep and resounding faith, yes, you are right, but even the puppies' bellies glow plumb by the crumbs that fall from the children's plates. And that's when the master says to her, your child is healed, your faith has healed your child. And so to use those last words to share that beautiful image of what that moment was, but it doesn't stop there, right? Because he's still walking, and they take him there, and he's bleeding out. He's conscious. They're praying the rosary throughout the whole thing, and he forgave his executioners, not knowing that it's his execution, although he did have a dream a couple of days earlier, and he was telling his friends, this is before Ash Wednesday, so a couple of days earlier, he says, I had the most weirdest of dreams. I had a dream that Christ was there and all the saints and martyrs and the people of heaven and the angels and the Blessed Mother, so beautiful, Mama, see, Mama, um, and the angels and the crowd and the people were all saying, long live Our Lady of Guadalupe, long live the Mexican martyrs, long lives Pedro y Jesus Maldonado. And he had that dream. It wasn't a recurring dream. It just happened that night, but I think he dreamt it twice. And so he was just struck by that. And he thought, well, maybe it was my time. And so all this happens, and then he's taken to Santa Isabel, El Presidio, to the quarters, and there he's bleeding out. They're not going to attend him. They're getting drunk, the soldiers at that went and got him. They were pretty much vigilantes and deputies. There's small towns. There's a very different rule of law than and back then as well. And so, brothers, then they come, and the ladies go to Chihuahua and try to get a transfer for him to go to Chihuahua. So he goes to Chihuahua and he gets a medical transfer from the prison to be taken care of. That's this image you see at the bottom right. He's wrapped. So if you notice, his left eye is wrapped. His lip is burst. Some of his teeth are chipped. And so this was a picture of him on the left around the age of 44 when he dies a martyr. If you notice, he's not wearing his clerics, and it's not because he's denying that. It's because it's illegal. It was illegal in Mexico to wear a Roman collar until 1991, when John Paul II went. The president of Mexico paid the fine on behalf of the Holy See. And that's when finally Carlos Salinas de Gortari, I don't know if it was abolished or removed, the law that now clerics can be worn in public in Mexico, but not at the moment. And so he gets there. The archbishop is undisposed and able to go. He sends two priests to do the last anointing, the last confession, and he's conscious throughout the whole thing. And they're not anesthetizing him. The soldiers and vigilantes were drinking, but not him. So he's fully conscious, fully receiving this pain throughout the 2-hour walk and the dragging the 4 hours to Chihuahua on the back of a carriage at night, and in the hospital that he's there. And finally, he falls asleep in the Lord the next day. But his martyrdom was Ash Wednesday. He offered everything, and the gospel has not changed in centuries, beloved. The gospel on Ash Wednesday is if you give alms your Father in secret, when you pray to your Father in secret. But no, this was a very public martyrdom. And even though he died because he was beaten by the butt end of a rifle, one thing that's always struck me about Father Maldonado, in all his iconography, it's never been his instrument of martyrdom, but it was his instrument that compelled him to love to that point. And if you notice in the Beato images, when he was a blessed, he always had a little cross, the Adoración Nocturna cross, which is this, the Nocturnal Adoration cross. And now is his public witness for the love of the Eucharist. And even this icon that our local parish, San Pedro Jesus Maldonado Parish, commissioned, it was Council 17449 that helped raise the money for this icon, modern icon from Spain, shows his love for the Eucharist in the distintivo, the medallion of the Nocturnal Adoration Society. This monstrance, there was a World Congress for the Eucharist in 1926 in Chicago, and this is a copy of that monstrance. And so remember that dream that Father Maldonado had, brothers. Up here to the right, that's a picture of his funeral. So word gets out that he's fallen asleep in the Lord. And Acción Católica, that was the youth group. The Cristeros were the warriors, the social engineering groups. The Acción Católica was a youth group that grew into young adult groups. And on that day, at his funeral, when word spread that the beloved priest, parish priest Maldonado, passed away, they didn't storm the municipal palaces. They didn't storm the prisons. They didn't storm the cuarteles, the barracks. They didn't storm areas of commerce. They didn't storm areas of government. Acción Católica, all the young adults of Chihuahua stormed the bell towers and pealed the bells. The bells were silenced during the first persecution in the early 1900s, 19 teens, and they had not rung since. They weren't melted or stolen, but they were not rung since. They were silent for decades. But then, when the blood of Father Maldonado brothers was spilled, that was it. the young adults, the community, the people of Mexico said enough. And so Father Maldonado closes the doors of the Mexican martyrs under the persecution in 1937 with his death. And so when his blood pours out, the sounds of the bells pours out. When his face was struck repeatedly by the butt end of a jaw, by a rifle in the jaw, in the face, in the stomach, and he was kicked and pushed and spat upon, and his hair was tugged. As the butt struck his face, so the bell clappers began to peal the bells, and they have not been silent since. And so, beloved, um, just how beautiful the testimony of a diocesan priest can be, and the legacy that he can leave, not just for his parish. And like I tell you, he was going to be publicly executed several times, and he was exiled, and he just kept coming back, because that's what you do. When the soldiers saw, we can't make this guy a martyr. That's too strong of a testimony that you can't destroy somebody, and they couldn't silence him. So they drove him out of the city into the desert to keep him away for 3 weeks. And he was emaciated and darkened by the sun, I'm sorry. And he came back to his people. When the locusts were, it's a very agricultural place, Chihuahua. When the locusts were destroying the crops, he would go out there and bless them. And when they couldn't come to mass during harvest time or whatever, he would go out there and confess the campesinos, the workers of the land. He would spend time with them, cook with them, and have mass with them. And so on that day when he was when his coffin was taken to burial, his dream came true, because as his coffin was being led, and remember, at every mass, especially a funeral mass, it's the church triumphant, the church suffering, and the church pilgrim still present always before the throne of the Lamb at the wedding feast of the Lamb. And so the people, as this coffin is being taken out of the church and into the burial grounds, you hear the words, "Long live Our Lady of Guadalupe, long live the Mexican martyrs, long live San Pedro Jesus Maldonado," all the way in procession, instead of the De Profundis, which is Psalm 130, "From the depths I cry to you, O Lord," or the other processional psalms to the way of burial. That's what they're chanting and singing. And again, the bells are ringing non-stop. Every little chapel, every little parish, it's just bell after bell is pealing, and they cannot stop them. Louder than the bullets, louder than cannon fodder was the pealing of the church's bells, and that chant. And how beautiful then that, I mean, these are just a mass of people, and I wish I could show you, brothers, just this, the whole plaza is filled, the street is filled, the camera cannot take a drone video of how massive the crowd was in Chihuahua over the burial of a priest, and he had died, and it was a couple of days to get him buried. So finally he's exhumed when he's beatified in the 90s, and just making sure, okay, when he's beatified in the 90s, oops, sorry, brothers. And he's taken to this urn. And since he was ordained in El Paso, the Archdiocese was very kind to the church in El Paso and gave us one of his bones to enshrine at our cathedral. And at the 100-year anniversary of his ordination in 2018, the Knights of Columbus helped coordinate with the church, our brothers, the order in Mexico and Chihuahua, the state deputy, and here in Texas as well. It was Doug Oldmixon, came, and here in El Paso. And we still had the old uniform, so that's why you could see our brothers bringing the urn, and it's currently at our cathedral where he was ordained a priest. And so, I mean, there's so much we can go on, as you've heard, brothers. But the 5 key things of what makes a diocesan priest a diocesan priest is that he belongs to the people, to the parish. He's an in-law to every family. That's why the bishop can, in his celibate love, that's why the bishop can move him from this parish to that parish, from this assignment to that assignment, because he's an in-law of every family in his celibate love. And he's there at every baptism, at every wedding, at every tragedy and burial. And he's there in the greatest of moments. He's there instructing us in the way of Christ. He's there at every Sunday worship and liturgy. He's there at every birthday party. He's there um, being Christ and modeling for us what a true man is, what a true husband is, what a true son and dad is. And because of their modeling, these loves go as follows. The first one is the local church. Obviously, he loved his diocese. He loved Chihuahua. When he was exiled the first time as a seminarian and saying, hey, you can't study here, you have to go over there, he stayed behind and said, fine, I'll do music so I can, para tocar junto con los ángeles, to play along with the angels in heaven, in the celestial choir, if I can't be a priest before the throne of the Lamb and worship him there forever in the eternal divine liturgy. And so he's a violinist. But then the persecution wanes down in northern Mexico, and he can continue his studies. And it's always there. When he was exiled, it was like, you can leave. I was like, I'd rather die and sing Viva Cristo Rey. And that's a very important phrase, the Viva, for the Mexican culture and imagination, because that's the Grito de Independencia, the independence clamor on El Dia de Dolores on September 15th for September 16th, when Mexico declared its independence from Spain. Father Hidalgo, and it was a priest, Father Hidalgo made the cry of Dolores, and at the end is like, long live Our Lady of Guadalupe, long live Mexico, long live Mexico. And so Viva Mexico, right, is a very important word. And so what people had to do, kind of like in the Roman times when you had to swear your oath to the emperor, all they had to do was Viva Calles, Viva el Gobierno, Viva el Comunismo, long live Calles, long live communism, long live the Mexican government. And but they no, the martyrs would say Viva Cristo Rey, Miguel Pro. He did shed his blood in Articulum Mortem, saying that at the moment of death, unlike San Pedro Jesus Maldonado, who was denied the crown of glory at that moment. But this is his parish, Santa Isabel. As you see, it's like when you go to St. Mary's in New Haven, just a beautiful, small, you know, beautiful church. And it's just an ordinary church. Um, Now it's set up for the new liturgy, but it's still the image. It was whitewashed. It wasn't ornate. It wasn't expensive. It's not a huge place. It's just right here. It's near this like river area. That's a truck. That's how big the river is. And that's how big the desert was where you had to go. And this is a church as it looks now. If you notice here, there's a stained glass window. It actually has Father Maldonado there back when he was beatified. And so that's the main thing, to see how our council chaplains, what is their life, their love there of the parish? What is the best and the worst and the most menial and the most significant, the most ordinary life at the council level, so that our pastors can share that? And Father McGivney had that. He knew the life of an Irish immigrant since he came from an Irish immigrant family. And so how are we going to help, like Father Maldonado, our council chaplains, to be able to have that passion, that love, and to be able to work with them as Grand Knights, because not every pastor is a Grand Knight of their council. But how do we get our councilmen? And then when they change priests, because we like one priest and we get along with one priest, but then they change, just like when the in-laws change, right? We don't choose who our sisters or brothers marry, but now somebody's birthday is important to us, and we go to their birthday parties. I never met the person in 30 years, but okay, now he's an in-law. It's his birthday. We're gonna go celebrate with them. And so for us as a council to realize, our pastors and our chaplains especially, what is their ordinary life and how can we bring Christ there and share, celebrate, and love that. Like I said, it was a love that called San Pedro Jesus Maldonado to even step out of seminary life, which happened to Father McGivney when his father died and passed away. He stepped out of seminary life to help his mom, to help all his siblings. And then by God's grace and people's generosity and caring and prayer, Father McGivney was able to return back and actually be ordained. Interesting about both priests, they were both interested in the Jesuits. So if you notice here, beloved, dear brothers, that here it says IHS, it's because he wanted to be a Jesuit. The Jesuits had been exiled out of Mexico. So in order to be a Jesuit, he was not going to be a Mexican Jesuit. He had to leave Mexico. So that's the reason why he didn't. But his intelligence, his study, and what he loved was the Militis Christi, the notion of St. Ignatius as the soldier, and to be militant and strong and virtuous in order to, because only the strong can be tender and affectionate, right? So, and so they protect, and so that's why he has that love for the Society of Jesus, but he never joined. And Father McGivney as well did not join as well as he did in his studies. And it's also a love of evangelization. So this is the Grand Knight of his council, Dr. Leonardo Gutierrez. He's a charter member of Council 2419 in Chihuahua, and they had a newspaper that they would print. I don't know if it was monthly or weekly, and they would talk about women and the dignity of womanhood. Here, if you read here, it talks about their Holy Week schedule and how they're going to have a fallout for Holy Thursday at the cathedral for Chrism Mass. So, like, they are active in the diocesan life, they're active in the parish life and in the local life. And the Grand Knight is there trying to protect. And there was even persecution of, they would go into council halls, the government, and look up the records and who was a Grand Knight, and they would try to get them through the Masonics or harass them or kick them out of social, remove whatever they needed for social progress and economic growth and status. Um, so And his other love for evangelization was nocturnal adoration. So in his first parish community, in the rural part by the Tarahumara Indians, the indigenous people of Tarahumara, there's a lot of alcoholism there, and there's a lot of abuse and violence with machetes and stuff. And so Father Maldonado really went in there and organized them. And then in Santa Isabel, Adoración Nocturna, Nocturnal Adoration Society, arrived in Mexico in the early 20s, and Father Maldonado was an early adopter. Since he was a seminarian, he'd always say he wanted to live with his heart between the doors of the tabernacle and the doors of heaven, entre las puertas del sagrario y las puertas del cielo. And so that's how he placed his love in his heart, brothers. And so one way is because most guys, when do they go out to drink? On Friday nights, right? They're going to go drink, waste all the money. So there's no money for food, there's no money for rent, there's no money for the kids, there's no money for clothes. And so the kids are all poor and malnourished, and the wives, and so, and then they come home, they could be violent, they could be, it's just, it was not a healthy situation. And so Father Maldonado said he'd go to the bars and be like, instead of wasting your money here, instead of wasting your lives here, go to Jesus, go to the Lord in the Blessed Sacrament and solve your problems there. Don't just anesthetize yourself with alcohol and violence and gambling, but fix your problems. Be a man, a true man, and go and kneel before the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the one who will make you a true gentleman and a full man. And so the Nocturnal Adoration Society was a very important part to him. And so as you can see here, that's why he has the distintivo, the medallion for that, and why he was such an early adapter of that. And his second love is the sacramental life, because our ordinary life is actually rooted, or it's the ornamentation of the tree of our faith. And the tree is very important and core so that the ornaments can hang and be beautiful and look amazing. But if you have a tree that's wonky, if you have a Charlie Brown tree, it's cute, but it's not robust, it's not substantial, and it's not just amazing. So Father Maldonado knew that the core of humanity was not just the nocturnal adoration, not just the Knights of Columbus, but it was to be in a state of grace, in a state to be able to receive the Lord in the flesh. It's one thing to go before him and bow and pray. It's another thing for him to be coming into our hearts, and not just in a sacrilegious state, but really, brothers, in an affectionate, welcoming, and instructive state as the King of Kings, as the foot washing slave who is the teacher and the master who has washed our feet. What you see here, beloved, are his instruments. So he's a sacred Bible. This is a chalice that he used during the persecutions and stuff like that. The reason he had this particular chalice, if you notice, it's a candlestick with a glass vase to protect from the wind. So when the soldiers would come and something was interrupted, they could stick a candle there and they wouldn't desecrate the chalice, because they would steal the chalice for the gold, they would steal the chalice for the precious metals, and because of the sacredness of it, and in order to impede any further celebration of the Eucharist. But what Maldonado is able to do here, brothers, is protect that. And so he would use that for Holy Mass. This was the pyx he had, and this was his rosary, a cincture, and one of his belts. This is in the seminary in Chihuahua that kept this. This is his front, and he uses a front kind of like the one that I use. That's a piece of cloth that goes underneath the suit. And the reason he would do that is he would put it on for mass and for sacraments and all that. And if anybody came or there was something, he could quickly take it off, throw it under in between the mattress, and run away and hide for another day. And then sacred scripture. Here, as you see, he has a rosary with him and his sacred scripture. So in his 2 times of exile that he was out in the desert, when he was alone, he would always say, because there were times he was not able to say mass. He didn't have access to wine or to the host. And so he said, I had no access to Christ in the Blessed Sacrament, but I always had access to Christ in his word. And to tell the story of a loving shepherd with his people, of a tender God who is the condensation of the Father's tenderness in Mary's womb, and walked with them and told them stories from their life, their fields, their crops, their ganado, their sheep and cattle. And then the rosary, again, sometimes he couldn't read at night, or he was tired or exhausted. But with the rosary, the Blessed Mother was my constant companion who never failed me. And through her, I had access to Christ when he came as a child, when he walked among us, when he suffered for us, and when he rose on the 3rd day. And so the rosary and the sacred scripture never failed him, even as a priest sometimes when he was unable to adore Christ in the Blessed Sacrament and celebrate the Mass. Again, this one's beautiful because he was also a charter member of Council 2419. And so his love for the Blessed Sacrament. So this distinctivo that you see here, this is actually it. These were brought to El Paso on the occasion of his 100-year anniversary. So that was the hat that he wore, a handkerchief, his glasses he would use to read, a little bell that he'd carry for the altar service. You know how you always want to get kids that want to help dad fix the brakes and want to help dad or mom make breakfast or clean the dishes. Well, they'd want to help father, right? And so when he was taking the Blessed Sacrament to the sick, he'd be like, well, here, ring the little bell. Or when they were having mass at a house or wherever, clandestine, here, ring the bell. So this is a little bell that he had. This is when he was made venerable, a little card. Chihuahua made this as when he was beatified, and there's the medallion. One of his rosaries, this one was worn and broken at those places. The Knights of Columbus, because there were 6 members of our order who are priests and martyrs from Mexico, and so he's among them in this corner right here holding the flag. And then this is a maniple that he used for Mass. And so his love for the Blessed Sacrament was all of it, because that's where he wanted to live, and he wanted all his sheep to be there, because he said, what good is it for me to get to heaven as a shepherd and not one sheep with me, and not all my sheep with me, including those who were going to execute him? And all this echoes what Father McGivney had, because again, why were the Knights of Columbus formed? To provide an alternative to the messianic destruction of the faith and say, no, this is how we support each other, to provide that insurance after we die, that our widows and orphans are taken care of and they will not be broken up. Because remember, the Connecticut court system was very, very vicious insofar, brothers, that the judge would break up the family and the kids that they could afford and not afford, and they wanted always the youngest ones, right? They would put the older ones and then go down, and oh, you can't afford these young ones. They wanted the younger ones to put them in non-Catholic homes to grow up without the faith, especially the faith of Christ in the Blessed Sacrament. And so this love for the disenfranchised and marginalized still continues. You saw those that were carrying his coffin from Acción Católica en la Oración Nocturna. They were not the elite and all that. He was a member of the Knights of Columbus, and yeah, they're businessmen and stuff like that. But his action was out there in the fields. My own grandmother, she lived to be 104, and she died about 5 years ago. Um, she tells a story, well, many stories, but when she was little, her love for priest began because she was rented. She was the youngest of, I think, 11 children. And at 6, she started being rented out to families. And so she would do the laundry, and that was her lunch she would take with her. And she's doing the house laundry. And it's not like laundry every day, like when the washing machine was invented. It was weekly or monthly, I'm not sure. She'd go out to the river and she'd be doing laundry, stretching out the clothes and all that. And she would encounter priests and religious. And she remembers one priest that wouldn't want to take her lunch. He's like, "Well, here, have my meal." And she felt bad because she didn't take more. And the priest, obviously, he's like, "No había comido en días." He had not eaten in days. So he's like, "Eat my meal, rest." And and she remembers once washing the cassock. And so he gets the priest's cassock, or the priest gives her his cassock, and she puts it in the river. And he's like, "Toda la tierra." It was like so dirty and sweaty and messy, and just washing the priest's cassock in the arroyo, in the running water, and then folding it so it looks like a skirt in case the changos, which was what my grandmother would call the soldiers, or the ones that were hunting the priest, would come and look just like all the other pieces of laundry she had with her. And she remembers mending a priest cassock once, and that's her love, that they were persecuted like dogs, and yet they loved the Lord, and they would bless her and pray for her. And she was a little kid, and the priest trusted her. And even though I'm her grandkid, and I became a priest, just the source of her love was encountering these martyr priests um, in the fields, and just the love they had for Christ, and how normal it was for them that, well, yeah, when the faith is persecuted, we're running around, but nothing deters us from being priests. So who are the disenfranchised at your council? What is the love for the Eucharist at your council, especially now that the USCCB is going to start the Eucharistic revival at our parishes? What can we do? A procession, an eternal adoration, a holy hour. How can we bring our families back to have that same love and tenderness in our parish priests and in our council chaplains for Christ and the Eucharist and for the community? Even if they're not called to be martyrs, even though they're not called to be founders of an orders of knights, um, they're called to show us how to get to heaven. And I hope you're able to work, especially my brother Grand Knights, with your council chaplains, with your pastors at your parishes, even if you're a hall council, to be able to bring that love of Christ, that witness of Christ, that strength, because that's why priesthood is so essential. And in our council, a lot of times I'll ask, well, can't the deacon be the chaplain? No, not for the Knights of Columbus. We're Knights of the Eucharist, as our Supreme Knight said, and our knights are the ones that are bound in solidarity with our priests, because it is our priests, our presbyters and bishops, who absolve us of our sins, who confect for us the Eucharist, who receive our offering. Remember at the offertory when we take the bread and the wine, who receive our heart of hearts and make it into a votive, a divine sacrament. And it is by their hands not only that we're anointed and reconciled to Christ, but receive him at last as viaticum, as food for the journey. The diaconate cannot do that. They're ministers, but the priests, the presbyters, and bishops can. And that's why our council chaplains can only be priests, not so much because of the dignity of priesthood, but because of the importance of the Eucharist for a Knight of Columbus, for a Catholic gentleman, and for the Catholic life on this earth and the earth to come. Peter, I think there were some questions that some of the brethren may have. And what legacy are we going to leave? Like I say, this is the image that the council made. These are the last two members of that council, 17449. We had an exemplification. That's our state diocesan deputy. Here we were at the dedication of this image. Mark Seitz, our bishop. I was there amongst them for this.
Thank you so much, Father Mark. Beautiful presentation. You know, I was reflecting as you were focusing on the disenfranchised, the marginalized. Father McGivney founded the Knights on the principle of charity. And what did we hear in our gospel just this past Sunday? Love one another. And this is how you will know that you are my disciple, the love that you show for one another. And then two, just a few Sundays ago, we had Good Shepherd Sunday. We prayed for vocations. So like you said, the parish priests are the shepherds, and we need to continue to pray for vocations because we need more priests to guide us, to strengthen us in the faith. So one of the questions has to do with the sacraments. And I know the sacraments are often referred to as outward signs of inward grace, but they don't seem to be appreciated in the modern church in the 21st century in the way that they were in Father McGivney's time and Father Maldonado's time. In fact, I think the sacraments in some ways were the faithful were deprived of the sacraments because of the persecution. And that made them even more coveted, more appreciated. How do we renew that appreciation for the sacraments, the regular practice of receiving communion, of confessing our sins?
What's helped me a lot with individuals is when I take them through civic religion, because as non-sacramental as an imagination can be, or as realist as they seem to be, I mean, how do you show love to somebody? You give them a flower, you buy them a birthday cake. And so these are signs and symbols to demonstrate something that's not effable, that's not containable. And so this is Christ action. And if we can get them to say, what is God and the church and the individual receiving the sacrament trying to accomplish, trying to express? And it's all in the head. There's almost a Gnosticism when it comes to sacraments and even baptism, right? We're all God's children. Well, we have to show with works. And because we're physical beings, we have flesh. If I love somebody, I want to buy them their favorite flower. If I love somebody, I want to buy them a birthday cake with as many candles as the fire marshal allows me to put on there. I want to show that love, that dynamic, that principle. And again, there's a promiscuity in our culture where nothing's a sin, therefore nothing's forgivable. And that's a very hard place to begin. And you need the love of Christ, um, Peter, for that affection to take place and to be able to look at yourself and say, I can grow more in the love of God. I can grow more in my love as a spouse, a dad. It's not this good enough Catholic that you're trying your best, let's move on. John Paul II says that beautifully in Veritatis Splendor, right? This ethics of intention is undermining our theology of sacraments because you think the intention is enough and they lose sight of the beauty. So I think beautiful liturgies and even us, now that we can wear the gold and white social baldric as third order members, like just wearing that to Mass and showing that these are important signs and understanding why the sacrament is brought out, that's helped a lot to awaken and deepen that sacramentality that you're talking about, that we've lost that hunger for sacraments because we're lost in what's happening.
It's amazing too. You mentioned right at the outset, Father, 100 years ago, Father Maldonado was a charter member of his council. But this is already in the midst of the persecution. Already the Caius government has been oppressing the church, and there's been anti-clerical violence for long before 1922. Yet a council's formed. I mean, you said you had a mark on your head if you were found to be a Grand Knight. You had a mark on your head if you were a parish priest. What gave them the courage to join the Knights of Columbus in the midst of all of this violence, where they realized that they were putting themselves at terrible risk?
I think it's the love that compels you to donate your kidney to your spouse or your child or your best friend. You know that you're at risk by donating half or a lobe of your liver, donating one of your kidneys, but to live without them, to live in a world where you could extend that life a little longer if they don't reject the organ, it's a non-brainer. So I think, Peter, that when the government's attacking the faith, where the faith gave us dignity, the government only taxed them, only said you're worth something if you're producing something. Because, yeah, they talk about the cosmic humanity and the social welfare and goodness, but it wasn't trickling down. The life of the poor was not any better with the ejidatarios and the nationalization of public lands and or making public lands all private lands and stuff like that. And it was going back into the system. So it was still injustice. It was an inhuman approach. And so the church is the total opposite. And because of the love of Christ and the evangelization that Our Lady did under her image and work as Our Lady of Guadalupe, I think that's why they said, why wouldn't I be a knight at Columbus? Why wouldn't I be a grand knight of my council? Why wouldn't I serve my best and lead others to Christ? Because they saw through the facade of the glitter and glamour of the, like you said, the Caius regime. It wasn't humanizing. It wasn't ideal. It wasn't egalitarian. It wasn't giving a dignity to the poor and the wealthy. And it was just, it was a hate of the elite, maybe. And the elite at that moment, because of the hard work of the Franciscan missionaries and so many people, was the church. And so I think that's why for many of them, it was a non-brainer that in 1922, it's like, yeah, put my name on that charter. And there's people who still transfer councils just to be a charter member and put that on their polo shirt, and then they'll come back from founding that council. And to have 11 priests when only 5 could operate, the government's at only 5 official priests. It's like with China right now, right? You have the underground church and the overt church and the government sanctioned church.
You've given us so much to think about, to reflect on, Father Mark. You know, I think in the 21st century, we often take our faith, we often take the sacraments, we often take our membership in the Knights of Columbus for granted. And yet here you just explained how much they could distinguish between the dignity that the faith gave them and what dignity the government wanted to rob from them in stealing the faith from them. So a beautiful reflection, great models that we have in Father McGivney, in Father Maldonado, and in our council chaplains today who lead us in the faith. Thank you so much. Our brothers in are going to enjoy your presentation in Spanish. Before I give over to my colleague Luis, could you give a blessing to all of us, please?
Absolutely. Beloved, the Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
Heavenly Father, through the intercession of Blessed Michael McGivney and Saint Pedro Jesus Maldonado, grant all the members of our order to continue to distinguish themselves in faith, hope, and love, and in charity, unity, and fraternity, that in the patriotism they manifest, they show how a country can be imbued with the virtues of religion and the freedom of religion, especially that which Christ gives in each and every one of us, that the charity of the foot washing Christ at the Last Supper may compel them always to come to the altar and receive him in the body and the blood, and to go out and announce to all peoples the radiance of his beauty and his love. May our brother knights in the sacraments find strength, courage, and perseverance, the deepening, expanding, and the outpouring of love that you have for us, O Heavenly Father, for Christ is the manifestation of your love in Mary's womb, on Calvary, and on the day of resurrection, and at every tabernacle where he rests in a holding tent until he can rest in the hearts of his beloved. May this courage and perseverance bless every grand knight of our order, bless every state deputy of our jurisdictions, bless our Supreme Council, and bless each and every one of our members and those who are considering to join in the Knights of Columbus, that we may always keep our faith in action, whether it's in the faith, in the family, in life itself, in our community. May we always, under the patronage of St. Joseph and these two amazing witnesses of the faith, Blessed Michael McGivney and St. Pedro Jesus Maldonado, continue to walk our ways until we all meet in Christ and are with you in the Holy Spirit. And we ask you to pour your blessing on our work, Father, in this coming fraternal year, on all our grand knight elects, our faithful navigators elects, our councilmen and various officers, you who are Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Viva Jesu, viva Cristo Rey.
Viva Cristo
Viva Cristo
Rey.
Rey.
Thank you so much, Father. Mark, do you need a break or
oh no, we're
ready to
fine.
proceed?
Yeah,
Luis?
whatever you like. We're like
my brother.
Encantado. Thank you very much, Peter. Muy buenas tardes tengan todos ustedes. Mi nombre es Luis Fernando Guevara. Ahora vamos a cambiar de idioma, de sabor, español ahora. Este es un webinar sobre la vida de San Pedro de Jesús Maldonado Lucero, santo y mártir mexicano, además caballero de Colón, que murió en 1937, hace 44 años ya. Fue martirizado por sus verdugos en Chihuahua, México, que eran autoridades locales del estado de Chihuahua. Y bueno, él fue miembro fundador del Consejo 2419 Alfonso Briones en la ciudad de Chihuahua, que como nos platicará el padre, cumple 100 años este próximo diciembre, mes de diciembre. Muchos aspectos de la vida y del ministerio del padre Maldonado son comparables a aquellos del beato Michael McGivney, y que es el sacerdote de Connecticut que fundó Caballeros de Colón en 1882. Entonces, con esta presentación del padre Mark Salas, vamos a aprender precisamente sobre estas similitudes y qué importancia tienen para cualquier párroco el día de hoy, cualquier capellán de los Caballeros de Colón, y obviamente también para todos los miembros de Caballeros de Colón, hijos espirituales del padre McGivney. La presentación ya fue en inglés en esta primera hora, ahora será en español y estará grabada para quien quiera verla y la podrán ver en el centro de peregrinación Beato Michael McGivney. Muy bien, a lo largo de la sesión obviamente pueden mandar sus preguntas, por favor. Y les presento al padre Mark Salas, que es sacerdote de la diócesis de El Paso, Texas, y capellán asistente del Consejo de Estado de Caballeros de Colón de Texas. Padre, pues muchísimas gracias por su tiempo. Encantado de poder acompañarlo y pues bueno, pues estamos todos listos y listos para escuchar su presentación sobre la vida de este gran santo, de este gran sacerdote y su testimonio que nos dio con su muerte.
Pues muchas gracias a ustedes, Luis, y a Peter, por haber hecho esto posible, ¿verdad? Y qué dicha que uno de los sacerdotes que se ordenó en nuestra tierra y celebró sus misas diarias aquí antes de regresar a su cantamisa en la ciudad de Chihuahua. Se ordenó aquí, es uno de los, no solo, como dice, mártir, pero también es miembro fundador de un consejo en Chihuahua en medio de la persecución. So, vamos a ver cómo el amor de un presbítero, un párroco diocesano, ¿verdad? Por su pueblo lleva a cosas extraordinarias, como llevó al padre McGivney a fundar los Caballeros de Colón en Connecticut, New Haven, en St. Mary's Parish, y como llevó a un simple párroco diocesano, el padre Maldonado, a también dar testigo como mártir y el que cierra la puerta, como veremos, en la de la persecución en México. Bueno, tenemos los cristeros, los mártires y la orden en México. Empezó la persecución bajo Calles en 1011 y llegó hasta 27, 25 y hubo dos movimientos de persecución en lo que es ahora México. Y lo que nos llevó a eso es que hizo la práctica de la fe católica contra la ley bajo la pena de la muerte. Y como vemos en esta imagen, el padre Francisco Vera fue fusilado en Jalisco por celebrar la Santa Misa. Celebra su misa, bien los soldados lo agarran, lo echan afuera, dicen te tienes que ir, dice no me voy a ir, entonces lo van a matar. A este punto, 1927, ya el Papa Pío X puso una indulgencia plenaria que aquellos mexicanos que bajo el rifle decían en artículo mortum, en artículo de muerte, viva Cristo Rey, recibían una indulgencia plenaria, más aún el martirio es lo que perdona los pecados, era una entrada plena hacia el cielo. Disculpen que tengo una infección respiratoria y pues a veces va a toser, disculpe por sus oídos. Vemos entonces aquí que fusilan a los sacerdotes, fusilan a los miembros. Hay muchas imágenes que se pueden encontrar en la red del internet, gráficas, ¿verdad? De lo que hacían con los cristianos y las cristianas, las monjas y los sacerdotes y los obispos. Entonces lo que pasa es que entran los comunistas, entra Calles y ve que el poder no reside en el gobierno mexicano. Hay mucha corrupción, incompetencias, el dinero no está bien administrado, pero ¿quién está organizado? ¿Quién tiene el corazón del pueblo? ¿Quién tiene toda esa organización en proceso? Es la iglesia. Y entonces el poder que reside en la iglesia, la codicia, Calles y la quiere destruir porque no la puede tener. Y porque todos ven que es falso el comunismo, los gentes de la masónica, no, no hay dignidad en eso. Entonces lo rechazan y empiezan los cristeros, especialmente en el sur. En el norte, el arzobispado en Chihuahua no realmente permitió, especialmente en la segunda ola de persecución, ser partícipes de los cristeros. Y tienen que hacer una decisión, y no nomás es el papá, involucra a toda la familia, a las esposas, a las hijas, a los hermanos, y incluso este joven de 14 años, ¿verdad? Luis es uno de los santos de nuestra iglesia, José Sánchez, que murió. Y tiene una historia bellísima. Podemos dar otra presentación otro día, ¿verdad, Luis?
Sí.
Sobre este bello joven mártir que ni tenía los 18 años para ser caballero de Colón, pero ya dio testimonio de la fe. Pero
Ahí,
como,
padre, si me permite una nota,
claro,
eh, José Sánchez del Río es de la ciudad de Zaguayo, Michoacán, y precisamente ahí también hay un consejo de muchos años de caballeros de Colón. Y bueno, pues ellos estuvieron bastante involucrados en ayudar a que saliera la causa canonización de este niño santo, que precisamente la frase con la que salía a arengar, a motivar a más personas a que defendieran su fe, era que nunca había sido tan fácil ganarse el cielo. Así que sí, sin duda podríamos pasar aquí otra hora solamente dedicada a él, pero continuamos con los mártires, padre.
Sí, y vemos ahí que en la bandera tienen el águila abajo, pero sobre el gobierno, sobre el águila, sobre la azteca y la historia de México, Santa María, mamá de Guadalupe, mamá morena, el Tepeyac, y ella es el símbolo para los cristeros. Y las medallas que usan ellos no son de ganancias y guerras, pero tienen medallas de santos que usan y cruces que se ponen para decir, así se gana la fe, la salvación, la dignidad, el valor y no sé, la vida en pleno, ¿verdad?
Así
Y
es, la imagen de Guadalupe representa la identidad del mexicano. De hecho, usted había mencionado que el padre Miguel Hidalgo, padre de la independencia de México, precisamente salió con una imagen de la Virgen de Guadalupe a convocar a la guerra de independencia. Y bueno, dentro de la misma Revolución Mexicana, que fue unos años antes de la Cristera, uno de los revolucionarios, los zapatistas, andaban con la imagen de la Virgen de Guadalupe. Entonces, para el mexicano, obviamente, es un gran símbolo de unidad y de identidad.
sí. No, y es cierto que, y para México en particular, no estoy seguro de las otras naciones en Latinoamérica donde se encuentra la orden, pero en México nuestra historia siempre fue acompañada por los presbíteros, desde Bartolomé de las Casas en Perú, y Tata,
Tata Vasco.
Vasco,
Sí.
siempre veían por los indígenas, veían por el mestizo, veían por el mexicano y el español, siempre traían la fe y desde Miguel Hidalgo, Morelos, siempre, pero en la revolución de calles y los comunistas y los masones no estaban los presbíteros e incluso eran enemigos de lo que dicen según ellos el gobierno mexicano real y por eso no les pueden apantallar, ¿verdad? Siempre han estado los presbíteros desde antes de nuestro nacimiento como nación, cuando éramos territorio español, desde cuando en nuestra dependencia hasta nuestra libertad en Puebla, ¿verdad? De los franceses. So, qué bello, ¿verdad? Que están tan unidas la religión y el patriotismo, no sé,
Así es, sí, exactamente.
patriotismo, está. Dentro de todo eso, están los cristeros, están los mártires y la orden está viva en México. Y en medio de todo esto, se forma el Consejo de Chihuahua y el previo diputado de Chihuahua ¿cómo dice? Nos compartió la acta de formación, constitución para este consejo. Y dentro de ellos, uno de los miembros que es que está, si ven aquí la puerta a la derecha, aquí este presbítero, hay otros, ¿verdad? Pero este presbítero es Padre Maldonado. En 1922 tiene 4 años de ordenado y se ha inscrito en medio de la persecución como uno de los 11 presbíteros que fundó Consejo 2419 en Chihuahua. Y nunca he visto una acta de constitución con 11 presbíteros. Y no solo eso, entre ellos un santo y dentro de ellos un santo como mártir diocesano por su pueblo. Hay muchos que mueren mártires en China, en Japón, en Vietnam como misioneros. Él en su casa ah, murió como mártir en un país católico. Y lo bello, Luis, que vi de esto es que desde 1922 esta acta fue escrita en español desde Connecticut y está firmado por el que era entonces nuestro caballero supremo, James
Flaherty.
Flaherty. Y no sé, o sea, son bellos y que el 17 de diciembre ustedes van a cumplir 100 años y ya
Sí.
tienen, dentro de 100 años ustedes ya tienen un mártir canonizado en su roster. Qué bello.
Es
Que,
impresionante. A mí siempre me ha impactado que la Orden de Caballeros de Colón tiene el regalo en el número, solo en el número de santos, que ni siquiera órdenes religiosas tienen. Y hay otros muchos mártires que ni siquiera se ha iniciado su causa, que de hecho otro también del estado de Chihuahua, que en fin, es verdaderamente un testimonio de lo que está llamado el laico católico y en especial aquellos de nosotros que compartimos la vocación de Caballeros de Colón a vivir y también dar testimonio de.
sí. Bueno, una de las cosas que me recuerda eso, Luis, una de las cosas que dijo Peter cuando estaba hablando con él y formando todo esto, dice, los caballeros de Colón son una catequesis en la
Sí,
caridad de Cristo.
sin duda.
Peter, I was just saying that when we were speaking, you talked about the Knights of Columbus as a catechesis in charity. And so we're hijacking that and using that in the Spanish presentation. Um, este, y qué bello, como dice Luis, porque es la caridad como nos ganamos el cielo y es la fundación, como vemos en nuestra ejemplificación ahora, que estamos basados en la caridad, por la caridad, porque es lo que nos lleva al cielo y es la única ley del Nuevo Testamento, del Nueva Alianza que Jesucristo ha formado, nueva y eterna, en su sangre y en su cuerpo, al lavar los pies que le dicen, amen como yo amo. Y ese fue el labor del Beato McGivney como nuestro fundador, nuestro párroco y nuestro ejemplar. Y por eso me imagino es lo que compadeció a alguien como San Pedro de Jesús Maldonado a poner su nombre públicamente en un documento durante la persecución pública en este acto.
De hecho, padre, si me permite, hay un paralelismo con el padre McGivney. A mí, pues digo, reflexionando yo también como inmigrante aquí en Estados Unidos, eh, pensando en lo que muchas veces muchos padres de familia que son inmigrantes, pues lo que esperan de sus hijos que se traen pequeños aquí a otro país o que nacen aquí en Estados Unidos, pues normalmente los motivan a que tengan acceso a la educación que ellos no pudieron recibir en su país. Aspiran a ser el doctor, el abogado, el ingeniero y, y- y tratando de pensar lo que la familia del padre McGivney tuvo que vivir al venir a Estados Unidos como inmigrantes católicos, que también yo creo que hasta sufrían mayor persecución que lo que hoy sufren muchos católicos, si no es que similar, pero en aquel entonces no había tantas leyes que pudieran protegerlos. Pero el que como hijo de inmigrantes, el padre McGivney escogiera el sacerdocio en contra de todo lo que promovía en aquel entonces aquella eh, sociedad puritana anticatólica, también habla del carácter y de la personalidad del padre McGivney, de que sabía bien, supongo que él también conocía la esperanza de vida de cualquier sacerdote de su época, así que no fue una decisión a la ligera, obviamente fue una completa entrega de sí mismo a esta vocación. Y bueno, pues aquí estamos hablando de un hombre que se entregó al martirio de una manera, nos va a platicar usted de cómo lo sufrió, pero hay otros como el padre McGivney que en el día a día, cada día ofreciendo su vida por aquellos a quienes atiende.
Sí, muchas veces, como son presbíteros diocesanos, es una espiritualidad distinta, porque en esa mentalidad, hasta el Consejo Vaticano, la santidad se ganaba a apartarse del mundo y si querías ser santo, te hacías presbítero. Si te querías hacer más santo, te hacías religioso, un fraile, un jesuita, un dominico. ¿Verdad? Los maestros, los entendidos, los de la sociedad, o sea, eso. Y si querías más santidad, te hacías un monje. Y entre los monjes, un tujo, ¿verdad? Pero el padre McGivney y el padre Maldonado, lo opuesto, como dices tú, con los pies en la tierra de su pueblo encargado a ellos. Y velar como un pastor por la santidad, porque ¿cómo se dice? El respeto del pastor está en la salud de las ovejas, ¿verdad? Porque dice, no, yo soy el buen pastor y todas mis ovejas anémicas o enfermizas o perdidas. Pues ese no es un buen pastor. Si tú tienes que contratar un pastor, vas a contratar uno que no tiene ovejas o están todas desvalidas y o uno que tiene ovejas grandes, bellas, saludables, que son de carne y de pelo
Gorditas,
bueno.
dígalo, padre,
Sí,
gorditas.
gorditas, ¿verdad? ¿Cuál es el buen pastor? Y
Claro.
como ellos son párrocos, ven eso y ahí está la santidad. Y por eso no son cobardes. Aquí el padre Maldonado recibe la primera comunión. Aquí está como seminarista, ¿verdad? Y aquí está el artículo de formación del Consejo a Fray Alfonso Briones. Y entonces el padre Maldonado vive su vida como un presbítero, un pastor con ovejas grandes. A veces había sequías o había una plaga de chapulines que llegaban y se comían todos los campos y todo eso, echaban a perder desde la raíz. Y es un chapulín así grande, y cuando comen babean negro, ¿verdad? Y están en todo. Y nosotros en Chihuahua no los comemos, pero se comen todo el maíz, echan a perder la flor, echan a perder el betabel, todo lo que siembra uno, lo destruyen esas plagas. Pues el padre Maldonado iba, bendecía esos campos y en tiempos de cosecho siembra, cuando uno no, o de heladas, cuando uno no podía ir al pueblo a misa, él iba a celebrar misa en los campos, iba a confesar, iba a llevar la comunión si no tenía tiempo de decirles la misa, bendecía sus campos, incluso este fin de semana es San Isidro también, bendecía los campos y esos campos que él bendijo con la Eucaristía, con su bendición, con el agua bendita, muchas de ellas se salvaron de las plagas, ¿verdad? Se comían las del vecino hereje, me imagino, que no dejaba al padre Maldonado celebrarle su misa. Y tuvo varios momentos de persecución que lo cazaban como un perro, escriben sus familiares, ¿verdad? Este es un libro, no conozco al señor Javier Contreras Orozco, este está en español, es el más completo de los que yo he encontrado y él escribe muy claramente, muy bello, muy de diálogo, ¿verdad? No es pura narración. Muy bien escrito, muy bien presentado por el señor Javier Contreras Orozco, para los que quieran leer este libro. No sé si todavía esté en publicación. If worst comes to worst, pues se los presto, ¿verdad?
Padre, le comparto, sí, todavía se publica, de hecho ya hay hasta la segunda edición y yo tuve el privilegio de conocer al señor Javier Contreras y sí, no, extraordinario lo que describe ahí de la vida y bueno, también de la época, ¿no? Da un muy buen contexto de qué es lo que estaba pasando en el país en aquella época. Sí, no, extraordinario. Quien pueda conseguirlo, adelante.
Sí, y se lee como novela, no se lee como datos, ¿verdad? Bueno, dentro de eso, lo están cazando como perro y se iba a los campos y todo eso. Mi abuela es de la Regina, ella vivió hasta los 104 años y ella de niña, era niña de renta, era analfabeta porque fue la última de 11 hijos y a los 6 años ya no tenía ni energía ni dinero para mandarla a estudiar. La rentaron y iba a lavar las casas. Vivía en la casa, limpiaba todo y una vez a la semana o al mes le tocaba ir al arroyo a lavar la ropa de la casa. Y cuando colgaba y todo eso, a veces llegaban sacerdotes que estaban cazando y se unían los changos. Los changos es lo que le decían a los soldados y los que estaban cazando a los sacerdotes y religiosos. Y y le veía a ese sacerdote con miedo, y lo que una de las cosas que impresionaba a mi abuela de niña, que él tenía miedo que una niña podía gritar, decirle a los soldados, porque eso, y mi abuela decía, pero les daba el lonche, les daba su comida, y muchos de los presbíteros no se la querían quitar. Dice, no, no, yo no le voy a quitar la comida a la niña. Y dice ella, no se preocupe, porque ella comía lo que sobraba en la casa, si sobraba en las noches. Am, ya no se preocupe, usted cómese lo que no ha comido en días, está todo anémico usted y todo oscuro. Y la sotana bien sucia, les quitaba el zacate, o sea, y lo lavaba en el arroyo. Y recuerda una vez cuando metió una de las sotanas al río y se la voy a dejar blanca porque se hizo negro, negro el agua de toda la tierra, el sudor, la sangre que ese presbítero cargaba en su sotana. Y le lavó su ropa al presbítero, le prestó ropa de uno de los señores de ahí de la casa. Colgó la sotana como si fuera falda para que se escurriera y se secara, y si vinieran los soldados, no, no, es una niña lavando ropa. Y cuando dice ahí, cuando se vestían ya con su sotana seca, y qué bonitos se veían, qué alegres, con la cara y la cara limpia, el estómago lleno y la sotana puesta. Y Y ese es el que le aflama a mi abuela por 100, bueno, murió a los 104, tenía 6 años cuando empezó, supóngale que durante la persecución hubiera tenido unos 12 años. am,
¿Qué tal?
ah, Ese amor por el presbítero, porque iba y les hacía una bendición y todo eso, y, y eso nunca se le olvidó. Y cada vez que veía un sacerdote, porque a veces estábamos en rancho, en la colonia de Palestina, y los sacerdotes estaban en María Auxiliadora en Chihuahua. A veces no venían y mis tíos pues se enojaban, y mi abuela nunca, nunca decía, no, el sacerdote es singular y ustedes no entienden porque no saben. Y pues cómo. Yo sí, de niña, imagínense hacer ese testimonio de lavarle la sotana, alimentar a uno que está perseguido, pues cómo no van a formar parte del consejo de la orden, cómo no van a amarlos. Pero una de las persecuciones donde el padre Maldonado es sacado públicamente y las ejecuciones son públicas, ¿verdad? Ven que él va a decir viva Cristo Rey, que el Papa Pío ha dado esa indulgencia y que no viva el gobierno, porque si dice viva el gobierno, viva Calles, lo dejan en paz y lo hacen públicamente, pero no, que dicen viva Cristo Rey o viva la Virgen de Guadalupe, viva Cristo Rey. Él es el rey, él es el gobernador de gobernadores, el rey de reyes, el príncipe de la paz, el que no tiene que compadecer bajo el rifle y el fusilamiento, el amor, el anhelo y la lealtad de un pueblo. Solo a través del amor, solo a través de su calvario. Entonces, él hace esa proclamación y los que lo tienen que fusilar no pueden, no pueden fusilarlo. Solo agarran, lo llevan a Juárez y lo jondean al paso, lo echan al paso y le dicen, aquí está el dinero y ya no te vuelvas. Porque sabían que si lo matan como mártir, todos los que están ahí viendo los iba a inspirar y iban a perder todo. Y le tenían miedo al pueblo, por eso, por eso los tienen que opresar con hambre, con control, la educación de los niños, la formación de los niños y los impuestos y el balazo, ¿verdad? La muerte. Entonces ven que su muerte pierden la causa, ¿verdad? Lo sueltan con dinero por lo valiente que es y regresa, porque él es diocesano, él es de Chihuahua y regresa. Hay otra ola de persecución en 25, 27 empieza ya, se formaliza un poco más en el norte, en el 29, y, y empiezan a buscarlos. Y lo exilian otra vez más, lo agarran de Santa Isabel, ya es párroco de Santa Isabel, y ahí es donde muere como párroco de Santa Isabel. Lo agarran y lo echan del pueblo, y él se queda entre los espinos, entre el valle y el llano, y muy bello. Esta imagen fue elaborada por el Consejo 17449 de San Pedro de Jesús Maldonado, aquí en una parroquia y consejo en la diócesis de El Paso. Y su amor por el Santísimo en la oración nocturna, ¿verdad? Ese es el distintivo de ese movimiento. La custodia es de cuando fue un congreso internacional en Chicago en 1923 y la Eucaristía, ¿verdad? Pero en esas idas de valle de exilio, llevaba con él el rosario y es el blanco que más al rato van a ver y la Sagrada Biblia. Y decía, cuando yo no tenía acceso a Cristo porque no tenía pan y vino, tenía acceso a la palabra, Cristo en su palabra. Y de noche o en el cansancio, porque cuando uno está en el sol, el sudor y el polvo, porque el polvo es muy fino en, en Chihuahua, pues no se puede leer, pero él tenía acceso a Cristo a través de la Santísima María. Ella siempre me acompañó en su rosario y contemplaba a Jesucristo en su nacimiento, en su vivir, su muerte y su resurrección, para que siempre nunca perdiera esa conexión con Cristo. Desde que era seminarista, ¿verdad? Decía que quería vivir con el corazón entre el sagrario y el cielo, ¿verdad? Y entonces sigue esta imagen a la izquierda, es de él cuando ya tenía los 44, unos meses antes de su martirio. No lleva el alzacuello como sacerdote porque era ilegal y se escribió en la Constitución. No se cambió la Constitución hasta 1991 cuando el Papa Juan Pablo vino por tercera vez, me imagino, a México y a Carlos Salinas de Gortari ya entonces se quitó eso de la Constitución o se omitió y él pagó ¿cómo se dice fine, Luis?
Ah, ay,
La fianza, no es fianza, es
no es fianza. La multa, perdón, la
la
multa.
multa, gracias, sí. Es
Así
que iba a
es.
decir mordida y eso es informal.
No, no, no.
La
Es
multa.
la multa, sí, sí, exactamente. De hecho,
ah,
padre, si me permite añadir, andaban, también el padre Miguel Agustín Pro es famoso porque se vestían como, bueno, pues como cualquier otro ciudadano, también porque verdaderamente ellos andaban en la clandestinidad y para poder llevar los sacramentos a toda la gente que participaba de ellos, que buscaba y esperaba a los sacerdotes para que les ofrecieran los sacramentos, pues obviamente esto era también testimonio de que no andaban buscando ser mártires y que los mataran en cualquier momento. Ellos también andaban con algún disfraz para que no los detectaran, ¿no? Cuando estaban ya en las ciudades. Pero como usted dice, en realidad, y en particular el padre San Pedro Jesús Maldonado vivía a Salto de Mata, en la sierra, y celebraba por allá escondidas, y cuando bajaba al pueblo o a la ciudad a dar los sacramentos, iban de civiles, así es.
sí, y la razón que mi abuela encontraba presbíteros con sotana es que la ley canónica decía el presbítero siempre tiene que vestir su sotana, se tiene que identidad como persona pública en su oficio público para que todos sepan, ahí está un sacerdote, él me puede ayudar, él me puede absolver, él me puede dar los sacramentos. Y sí me ha pasado, antes que era presbítero y ya como presbítero, que escucho confesiones en los aeropuertos, en los aviones, en el mercado, hago unciones, he arreglado matrimonios donde, bueno, deme estos documentos, aquí están mis datos. Y por eso, pero el Papa Pío XI hizo una excepción a la iglesia en México. Para que no tuviese que usar la sotana e ir clandestinamente para promulgar, sanar, profundizar y alimentar la fe de los católicos. Entonces, ya en el 37, lo que empiezan a hacer los comunistas, ya empiezan con los niños. Las escuelas les están indoctrinando en el comunismo, socialismo, la masónica y el ateísmo. ¿Verdad?
Así es.
El padre Maldonado empieza desde el púlpito a decir, no lleven a sus hijos porque los van a maleducar, porque no van a tener la fe, no van a tener a Cristo, no van a tener humanidad, y la humanidad que se les da va a ser mal, no va a ser vida, va a ser un, un falso
Error.
idealismo, un error profundo de lo que es la humanidad, el amor, la caridad, porque dicen que todos somos buenos y todo eso, pero no, y él explicaba en los mismos artículos del comunismo cómo esos falsos socialismos no llevaban a la libertad verdadera. Y entonces esa escuela no iban los niños. Y en sus parroquias en Santa Isabel, los niños no iban a la escuela, empezaron a formarlos en la casa con las matemáticas, la literatura y todo eso. Y se enojaron. La escuela en Buquías se quemó y le echaron la culpa a él por haber predicado lo que predicó en el púlpito. Y entonces ya lo tenían por orden de arresto de prensa y a presión. Y entonces es cuando se fue a esconder. Y el miércoles de ceniza de 1937, que fue el 10 de febrero, lo traiciona uno de sus amigos, Gerardo, y le dicen, está en este ranchito aquí, y van y lo buscan y lo agarran, ¿verdad? Y las mujeres empiezan a pelear y dicen, no, 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 déjenlo. Los hombres están en el campo y él se queda a proteger las mujeres y llevar los sacramentos y ayudaba con los pobres. Si había un viudo, un huérfano por viuda, por la persecución, por cosas que les pasan en el campo y en la vida. Él administraba los bienes de la parroquia y de las familias y los conocía a todos. Es la cosa con un presbítero, ¿verdad? Él conoce toda la gente más que el alcalde, más que los caciques, o sea, él conocía a todos y todos les confiaban. Y eso,
Si me permite añadir ahí, padre, justo lo que usted dice, los relatos, sobre todo de miembros de la adoración nocturna de ese día, también mencionan que varios de los que fueron a apresar al padre, a los que acompañaban al grupo de los agraristas, había policía rural, policía montada, que varios de los que estaban participando en ese grupo llevaban la cruz del miércoles de ceniza en la frente. O sea que sí, como otros mártires, incluso el José María Robles Hurtado de Jalisco, él le quita la soga a su verdugo y le dice para que no se manche las manos de sangre, compadre. Él le había bautizado al niño. O sea que, sí, como usted dice, el padre conocía a todos ahí y era verdaderamente en fin, pues le deja ver todo lo que estaban siendo verdaderamente manipulados por el gobierno, ¿no? Controlados por el gobierno.
sí, y eso es algo que todavía sigue en la fe. Aquí en la presa de Fort Bliss, este, vienen muchos, presidio de Fort Bliss, niños que no están acompañados, muchos son de Guatemala y había crecido el encampamento de 5,000 niños y cuando me dejaban iba yo y escuchaba confesiones horas y horas, cada recámara o cámara tenía 500 niños
Wow,
y llegaba yo y el que era consejo, ¿verdad? The health counselor decía, no, aquí no hablan esto, no saben nada y hacen un anuncio. Está un sacerdote católico escuchando confesiones, si quieren, está ahí en la esquina. Y había un cuartito donde había privacidad y no me dejó usarlo porque ese era el social worker. Bueno, me puse afuera enseguida de las camas y puse una silla y otra y se formó la línea. Y se enojó tanto ese hombre. Yo he estado aquí y les digo que estoy para ayudarles. ¿Que les puede ayudar? Y hablan con él.
wow,
Y, y niños de 11 a 17 años y la cruz que han llevado y cómo se desahogaban con un sacerdote, con alguien que lleva hasta el cuello y el poder de las órdenes y escuchaba confesiones 6 horas a la vez en cada campamento, lo que me dejaba el gobierno. Y ya me quitó eso después de unos meses. Am, pero sí, o sea, el presbítero todavía tiene esa cruz, esa belleza, confianza del pueblo de Dios y en la juventud, digo, niños de 14 a 17 años de Guatemala.
Y es por el testimonio de los sacerdotes.
No sé, pues no me van a
Los
conocer
misioneros.
de alguien más.
Así es.
Y entonces es aprensado el padre Maldonado el 10 de febrero de 1937. Lo encuentran en el ranchito. Él se lleva la Eucaristía con él porque está hallando el Beaticum. Dentro de eso lo agarran o golpean y con
La cacha del rifle.
la cacha del rifle le dan contra la cabeza varias veces. Dentro de ellas, en el lado izquierdo, le quebran esta parte y le rompen aquí hasta el punto del ojo y se le sale el ojo izquierdo. Y tiene los dientes quebrados y la quijada un poco suelta. Todavía puede hablar y cuando se le dio ese golpe en particular, se le soltó de su persona el relicario donde llevaba todavía 2 hostias por llevar la comunión. Y uno de los verdugos lo vio, lo agarró y dijo, trágate esto, padre. Digo, trágate esto, perro. Y qué, qué bello para un mártir de la iglesia recibir el viaticum, porque como el bautismo, cualquier persona puede administrar el viaticum, la última comunión. Y más importante que la última absolución, más importante que la última unción de los enfermos, es la última comunión. Y y que un verdugo agarra esto y sin saber le da la Eucaristía y él come la Eucaristía mezclando el cuerpo de Cristo no con su saliva, no con su sudor o llanto, pero con su sangre que se está derramando por amor a Cristo y por odio a Cristo de parte de los verdugos, ¿verdad? Y miedo porque no pueden controlar la gente, porque este amor de Cristo no los deja opresar a la gente, la dignidad que Cristo les da no los pueden controlar, no los pueden entorpecer, no los pueden manipular. Y entonces lo llevan a Santa Isabel a pie, descalzo, y él está rezando, las señoras están caminando con él, lo están empujando, lo están golpeando, se cansa, no le dan agua, ¿verdad? Y en Santa Isabel ahí lo dejan tirado y pues ya por fin agarraron al que tenían que opresar, que empezó el fuego en la escuela, que no lo empezó, pero es lo que le echaron la culpa. Y entonces se ponen a tomar y están tomados. Una de las mujeres llega a Chihuahua y agarra un cambio de médico para llevarlo al hospital y entonces lo llevan al hospital. Ahí en Chihuahua sigue en agonía, ya como ven aquí en la imagen de abajo a la derecha, es en su cama, lo envuelven en sábanas y ese lado, por eso tiene aquí tapado, es donde está abierto y el ojo lo tiene perdido y está hinchado. Como ven, él es más arrugado, ¿verdad? Pero lo de tanto golpe se le hincha el cuerpo, los labios lo tiene roto y así es como fallece. El arzobispo escucha que el padre Maldonado ha sido golpeado y está agonizando y manda 2 presbíteros en la mañana y ya el 11 de febrero a las 4:13 es cuando se duerme en el Señor el padre Maldonado. Y una de las cosas bellas de eso es de que unos días antes, una semana antes, tuvo un sueño y le dijo a sus amistades, a las mujeres, le dice, tuve un sueño muy, muy raro. Vi a Mamá Guadalupe, vi a Cristo Rey, vi a todos los ángeles y los santos y mártires y se oía a todos diciendo que viva la Virgen de Guadalupe, viva Cristo Rey, viva los mártires de México, viva Pedro Jesús Maldonado, el padre Maldonado. Y él pues se extrañó y no tuvo ese sueño varias veces, nomás 1 o 2 veces, pero lo conmovió a decir, bueno, se me hace que ya va a ser tiempo y sí, cuando ya por fin se duerme en el Señor el padre Maldonado, escucha a todo el pueblo, es conocido por todos, es amado por todos, él es muy activo, muy dinámico. Y la Acción Católica, ¿verdad? Uno de los grupos de jóvenes a través de la oración nocturna y todo eso, se movilizan. En esta segunda ola de la persecución, el arzobispo de Chihuahua prohibió a cualquiera ser cristero en su diócesis bajo la pena de excomunicación. No había cristeros tan activos en Chihuahua por obediencia al arzobispado. Pero lo que sí había era la acción católica. Y lo que esos eran jóvenes que ya crecieron en joven adultos y hombres, ese día, aquí están cargando su féretro, al escuchar que el padre Maldonado había fallecido, que había sido puesto a muerte tan cruelmente por estos verdugos, no fueron al cacique, no fueron al palacio gubernal, no fueron a las cortes, no fueron a las cárceles, no fueron a las barracas y donde estaban los soldados, a los presidios. Llegaron y entraron a sonar las campanas de todas las iglesias. Entraron en números a todas las torres, a que todas las campanas por todo Chihuahua sonaran porque ya, la muerte de su querido padre era lo suficiente. Su sangre derramada, cada golpe del rifle, ya. Y entonces es como termina por fin en 1937 con el último derrame de sangre de un presbítero, miembro de nuestra orden, y suena por fin. Las campanas se habían quedado silenciosas desde 1920, cuando la primera ola de la persecución empezó en el norte, en Chihuahua, y no habían sonado por 17 años y ya con la muerte del padre Maldonado, ¿qué más? Pero qué bello, ¿verdad? Que bajo la obediencia del obispado no nos llamó a las armas, sino a la fe y la santidad, y que más fuerte que cualquier balazo, golpe, grito o destrucción del gobierno fue las campanas de todos los campanarios en Chihuahua a la muerte de su querido y amado presbítero diocesano Pedro de Jesús Maldonado. Y entonces llegan todos al funeral. No hay cómo llegar, dónde, cómo. Y cuando van llevando el féretro a su lugar de descanso en el cementerio, la gente empieza a gritar y las campanas no dejan de sonar por día y medio. Tan suene, 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 suene y se llevan turnos porque ya,
Father,
sin
I'm
la...
sorry to, I apologize for interrupting.
Yes.
We've got about 10 minutes left on our session.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and okay. Thank you. I'll close up real quick. And we didn't get to the loves, but they're all there. No llegamos a los anhelos, pero ahí están todos. Y se los camino con ustedes por ellos rápidamente. Suenan las campanas y llevando el féretro al padre Maldonado a su entierro, después de su exilia, era viva la Virgen de Guadalupe, viva Cristo Rey, viva los mártires de México, viva San Pedro, viva el Padre Pedro de Jesús Maldonado. Y por todo en el de Profundis se clama eso. Y entonces los anhelos diocesanos, los anhelos que todo padre párroco como el Padre McGivney y el Padre Maldonado, es ese anhelo por esa vida diocesana. Cuando primero se interrumpieron sus estudios de seminario, el padre McGivney fue a cuidar a su familia cuando murió su papá. El padre Maldonado se quedó en Chihuahua a estudiar la música porque dijo, bueno, voy a estudiar el violín porque si no puedo ser sacerdote, pero aunque sea puedo ser uno de los ángeles cantando en el cielo, ¿verdad? Pero regresó al seminario cuando se bajó la primera ola de la persecución y luego ya recibió la ordenación en Chihuahua porque su arzobispo estaba enfermo. Y un mes después, el 11 de febrero, que es el mismo día cuando muere, bueno, 19 años después, y también ese anhelo por la evangelización. Él formó parte del primer consejo en Chihuahua, uno de 11 presbíteros, y su gran caballero, ¿verdad? Leonardo Gutiérrez, y ellos tenían su documento, y desde entonces están hablando de la dignidad de la mujer, esta propatria ejemplar del periódico, habla de que van a tener la misa crismal en Chihuahua y que ir a hacer eso. Y también por la oración nocturna. Como ven aquí, tiene su distintivo su amor, porque él decía, si no amamos a Cristo en la carne, ¿cómo podemos? Y lo que ayudó la oración nocturna, él en su primer parroquia ayudó con las tarumadas que estaban bajo el alcohol y mucha violencia y todo eso. Para los de su pueblo decían, a estar malgastando el dinero en la cerveza, en la violencia, en las mujeres, en todo eso, y sus niños allá sin zapatos y sus esposas sin comida, sin hambre, y lo llegan y las golpean, dice, vayan mejor a, a a estar con el Señor y solucionen sus problemas. Y ven también su anhelo para la vida sacramental, porque en la vida sacramental esto era lo que él usaba, ¿verdad? Y este cáliz es uno que usaba cuando estaba escondido, porque si entraban los soldados o lo que sea, y hay un cáliz religioso, no solo a él, a toda la familia. So, él se escondía y encontraban eso, pues es para las velas. Y que vino, que era cristal, y se veía ahí la preciosísima sangre del maestro. Aquí, cuando se celebró en El Paso sus 100 años de ordenación, la Arquidiócesis de Chihuahua nos prestó eso. Aquí está el rosario que usaba, estaba quebrado y lo arreglaba y se le seguía quebrando y se le quebró ya después de haber fallecido. Su distintivo como oración nocturna, el manípulo de una misa que él usaba para celebrar la misa, una campanita que usaba cuando llevaba el sacramento, le gustaba a los niños, ¿verdad? Ayudarle al padre como cualquier niño le gusta ayudar a su mamá o a su papá. Y dice, pues tú suena la campana. Aquí eran para poder leer sus anteojos, su gorro, ¿verdad? Para que le quitara el calor del sol, le estar en la sombra. Y estas estampillas, este es cuando fue hecho venerable y se abrió su causa. Este es cuando fue declarado beato en en el 91. Y este fue, como es miembro de nuestra orden de la Caballería de los Caballeros de Colón, forma eso. Y entonces el amor y el anhelo hacia los pobres es lo más importante porque quien acude a los santos y ven aquí donde se enterró primeramente, todavía van los pobres a llevarle flores, a llevarle imágenes, a llevarle oraciones. Y qué bello eso. Y entonces eso deja nuestro legado para nuestros presbíteros, porque el presbítero del consejo es el párroco y qué es la vida que él necesita, qué apoyo necesita de nuestros caballeros, gran caballeros y nuestros consejos para que ellos puedan llevar a Cristo a todas las naciones. Este es la parroquia, este es el consejo 1744-9, San Pedro de Jesús Maldonado, los dos nuevos miembros de ellos. Este es cuando se bendijo la imagen por Don Mark, Monseñor Sites. Aquí estamos, aquí está un digno servidor de ustedes. Y esta es la imagen que se elaboró para el mártir. Pero muchas gracias a Peter y a Luis. No sé si hay algunas preguntas que podemos hablar o compartir. Es mucha información, yo sé.
Muchísimas gracias, padre, ¿no? Impresionante. Y qué hermosa es esa pintura de San Pedro de Jesús Maldonado. Yo creo que habrá que sugerir por aquí que emitemos nuevas imágenes, nuevas estampitas de oración de este santo, pues para seguir dándolo a conocer, su vida y, pues sobre todo para seguir invitando a más hermanos, sobre todo hispanos, que compartan un poco de esta historia de México en su familia, que se unan a Caballeros de Colón para poder seguir llevando a cabo para seguir llevando este testimonio de amor, de caridad, de entrega cotidiana. No sé yo creo que Peter, I don't know if we have any question from the public in particular.
Only questions that had come in earlier in English.
Okay, all right. Bueno, yo creo que las de inglés las podremos contestar más adelante para las personas que las hayan formulado, esas preguntas. Pero si no tenemos ninguna otra pregunta, nuevamente, padre, agradecerle su tiempo, agradecerle el que nos haya acompañado. Esperemos que esta no sea la última vez. Este próximo sábado es precisamente la fiesta de estos santos mártires mexicanos el 21 de mayo, que fue el día en que los canonizó San Juan Pablo II. Así que pues vayan a misa, vayan a recordarlo y compartan el testimonio de estos hombres. Finalmente, Padre, pues no sé si nos pudiera conceder una bendición para seguir nuestros caminos y bueno, pues esperamos verlo nuevamente pronto.
No, pues claro, y gracias a usted, Peter y Luis, pues, por esta oportunidad, ¿verdad? Porque es una bellísima historia que me inspira a mí como presbítero, que me inspira a mí como caballero de Colón y me inspira a mí como gran caballero del Consejo para poder, no sé, seguir los pasos de Cristo a través de los pasos de sus sacerdotes y sus mártires y el fundador McGivney. Qué bello, ¿verdad? Qué gran legado tenemos nosotros y riqueza como iglesia y como país, ¿verdad? En las Américas.
Así es, Padre, y muchas gracias por su vocación, por su ministerio, que verdaderamente nos alienta a acercarnos a Cristo y bueno, pues que su ministerio dé muchos frutos más.
Nuestro auxilio es en nombre del Señor que hizo el cielo y la tierra. Padre bueno y alabado, te pedimos por todas las bendiciones que nos has dado, no solo en la riqueza de los sacramentos, en la belleza de la vida catequética, de conocerte a ti y la condescendencia de tu ternura paternal en Jesucristo, en sus palabras, que todo lo que nos lleva a ser hijos tuyos celestiales. Te pedimos que a través de sus presbíteros nos ayudes, ¿verdad?, a seguir profundizando este gran misterio, el que dejó su carne y sangre como verdadera comida y verdadera bebida para poder salvarnos de la oscuridad, de la terrenía, del miedo, de la persecución, de todas las cosas que no nos deja proclamar tu ternura y vivirla en nuestras familias, en nuestros hijos, en nuestras amistades, en nuestros enemigos, en nuestros consejos, en nuestras parroquias y ante nuestros párrocos. Ponemos en tus manos el sacerdocio de todos nuestros capellanes, de nuestros consejos a lo largo de la orden, para que ellos puedan, al ejemplar del Padre McGivney y el Padre Maldonado, poder guiarnos en esa ternura, en esa caridad que es una gran catequesis de tu amor por nosotros y la realidad que podemos vivir, una dignidad, una paz, una realidad que el mundo ni el gobierno la puede dar ni rebatar, pero siempre anhelando en la caridad servirte y dar testigo de ti. En ese gran amor. Te pedimos que bendigas a nuestro caballero supremo, Patrick Kelly, y todo el Consejo Supremo para seguir entonces este gran labor que nos ha encomendado el Padre McGivney, este gran labor que nos ha encomendado tu Hijo. Y pedimos siempre tu bendición, tú que eres Padre, Hijo y Espíritu Santo. Amén. Viva Jesús y viva Cristo Rey.
Viva Cristo Rey.